Test one. Test two.
Very good. Our mic's not good, sorry.
Could you hear what I said?
If this had been an actual emergency, you would have been told where to go and what to do.
Great. Well, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you all had a very productive networking break. I'm very much looking forward to this panel here. I think there's a lot to learn from some of our space industrialists that we have on stage here. Guillermo Sohnlein will start us off, and he'll be moderating the discussion between our distinguished guests here. So please welcome them all to the stage and look forward to a great discussion.
Thanks, Brad. All right, looks like a good group. I'm sure we'll have more people coming in here as we come back from the break. For those of you that have looked at the program and the theme for the day, for all of the panels and discussions today, I think the theme was the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. And as I was listening to a lot of the program earlier, I think some of the earlier panels touched on a lot of the thrill of victory, but I can tell you that this panel right now is probably going to focus more on the agony of defeat. So it should be an interesting discussion. When Brad told me the topic for this panel, I was pretty excited that I was going to be a part of this one, because I consider this one the fun panel. If you listen to entrepreneurs, I think entrepreneurs are pretty excited about talking with other people about their successes, about the milestones that their companies have hit, about lessons learned of how to properly build a successful venture. But if you get entrepreneurs sitting together at a bar drinking beers, after the first beer, they'll probably still be talking about all their successes, but by the time they get to their second beer, what I found they usually like to talk about and commiserate with each other is all the mistakes they've made, all the blunders, all the market misses, all the technology problems. And it kind of becomes a little bit of a one-upsmanship and storytelling. It's like, yeah, you think that VP of sales was bad. I've got a worse one for you. And I think it's interesting to have a panel like this because human nature being what it is, I think we learn more from our mistakes than we do from our successes. And so I'm looking forward to hearing a lot of the war stories that my fellow panelists have here. I know from, Jeff made me laugh earlier this week. We were talking on the phone and I was telling him that I considered this the fun panel because we get to talk about all of our mistakes. And he was telling me that, he says, I guess if I should stick around doing this entrepreneurship thing a little bit longer so I get qualified to be on the boring panel that talks about the successes. So a little bit of logistics. Obviously, you can already see this is going to be a little bit different format than some of the other panels. We're not going to be doing any presentations. There's not going to be any questions that I'm going to be asking. We're going to be doing this a little bit more as a little bit of a roundtable discussion. Therefore, there's not really going to be a formal Q&A session at the end. Brad, I guess I forgot to tell you that. So if you've got people with microphones running around, we're going to be jumping around through a number of different topics. As we're going along, if you've got questions, raise your hand, wait for a microphone. I'll wait for a break in the flow of the discussion, and then we can incorporate your questions right into it. The other thing is I'm not going to formally introduce all the panelists for a couple of different reasons. One is that you've got all our bios in your programs and you can read them as well as I could tell you. But the other is for the particular content of this panel, when we're telling you all of our war stories and all of these different things that went wrong in all the different companies we've been involved with, our bios are going to come out as part of the discussion. So don't worry, you'll hear what we've done in the past. But I will introduce on my far left, on the far end of the couch here, is Jeff Greason. Next to him is Debra Lepore. And then right down here is in the middle is Tim Pickens, who most of you probably heard from today during lunch. And right next to me is Jason Andrews. So with that being said, why don't we kind of get started a little bit. One of the ways that I thought we'd frame the discussion just a little bit so it's not a complete free-for-all is to talk about mistakes we've made in some of the critical areas that it takes to actually build a successful venture. And some of you may have heard me say this before in other contexts, but the recipe for building a successful venture is surprisingly simple. And it's not rocket science, and it's been done the same way in different forms for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And I'll share it with you, right? It's a 5-step process. Number one, you need an idea. Then you put together a team that can execute on the idea. You put in a little bit of capital to get you going. You build your product or service, and then you get customers. And that's really, there's different variations of that, but basically that's about it. And from that very, very simple formula, it's amazing how many things can go wrong. And they keep smiling every time I start talking about mistakes because they're already thinking. So why don't we start with one section, and why don't we start with the very first step, which is business idea. All of us, I'm sure, have had ideas for great startups. I know we just had a panel about different opportunities that are coming up that we can look for. But there's things that always go wrong with the business ideas, business strategies, or the business plan. And so I'm going to ask you guys about some of the mistakes that you've made in your own business planning, business strategies, markets you've missed because you were early, strategies that just backfired on you. And while you guys are thinking about that a little bit, although I know you've already got ideas right off the top of your head, I'll share with you one story from our the first startup that I did, going on 12 years ago. Me and 3 co-founders started an internet company. It doesn't matter what we were making for the purposes of the story. We started an internet company. We went through the 5 steps. 4 months into it, we had our first product and had our first set of customers. 6 months into it, we had to change business strategies. And the reason was that we made a pretty big business strategy mistake in month 4. Month 4, we got out, we had all our initial product, we had our initial customers, and we got approached by one of our competitors to be acquired for $10 million. And being infinitely wise that we were, all of us doing our first startup, we turned down the acquisition offer. Did I mention there were 4 of us? So $10 million, right? Okay, so we turned down $2.5 million each.
6 months into it?
6 months into it. Well, at the time it was 4 months into it. Would have been a nice paycheck for 4 months worth of work. So we turned it down because it was one of our competitors, and at the time, in our arrogance, I guess we thought we didn't want to be absorbed. We wanted to go crush them instead. So a month later, they were acquired by Yahoo for $135 million. Now, instead of competing with another little startup, we were competing with Yahoo, and there was just no way we were going to do that. All of a sudden, we realized we had a worthless company, a worthless product, and we basically had to ditch everything that we'd been doing for 6 months, take our lumps that we just gave up, $2.5 million each, and totally reposition the company. So that was one very hard lesson learned, that if someone offers you $2.5 million each for 4 months worth of work, you should probably take it. So that being said, any of you have any, can you guys top that, first of all?
You got me beat.
Yeah.
Lesson from my very first investor was, you negotiate, you do all this stuff, and at the end of the day, take the money.
Yeah.
I got nothing. The one area of the company that I'm perfectly happy with is the business idea. The step where then you get the investment capital has continued to be elusive, but as far as the business idea and how the market goes, everything is proceeding as I had foreseen. So it's just taking longer than I hoped.
So at least on that part of it, you're qualified for the other panel, right? Not
maybe.
this one. Yeah. Debra, how about you? 'Cause
I've got a great example that dates back to XCOR Aerospace. And when XCOR was first formed, so this was to build a reusable 2-stage vehicle, and it was funded completely privately to serve the low Earth orbit telecommunications market. The first customer was Globalstar. They signed a contract for 10 launches when the concept was still very much on the drawing board. And a lot of momentum came out of that first contract. It was $100 million. And investors came in. The vehicle was designed around getting how many Globalstars or how many Iridiums could you get up into orbit. And this was really part of the reusable launch industry was created because of this market requirement for a lot of satellites, a lot of launches, and you need to get the cost down in order to make their business plans. Well, kind of fast forward with that, the LEO telecom market went away. Then you had the dot-com bomb. Asian flu, the bond market crashing. So every time to try to go out and raise money just was the worst timing ever. So here Kistler had this design for a vehicle that could go up and back. And we were talking to NASA one day, brainstorming, and said, well, you know, that space station is taking an awful long time to get built, and maybe we could have some microgravity time. Could you just guys take the K-1 and leave it up there for like a month or a year? Because we in the microgravity community really need some kind of access, and we don't have time to wait for a space station. We thought, well, yeah, that's kind of a good idea, but you know, there's other things that you need. Maybe we could do commercial resupply of the space station. Sound familiar? So Kistler actually, we put together a strategic idea for NASA. Being set up as a commercial company, we could not sign the contract that NASA wanted us to sign, so we said we'd do it for free. And they said, well, you can't do that. Well, why not? Well, because we're paying everybody else. So we came up with an MOU to NASA that said, we will do this study for you and market ourselves of how we could be really innovative, and we'll give it to you for free, and you'll accept it. We actually had to sign an agreement to allow that. So it did, and that morphed into an unsolicited proposal that I led for Kistler in 1999 for, and you were still there. Were you still there?
No, I left.
You had left in 98. For resupply of the space station. And that went to Johnson. And, you know, the rest kind of is history, that the one with we were successful momentarily for shifting the market from 100% LEO telecom to now a government customer who had a real need, and eventually a real need once Columbia went down. And we did a lot of work in there to completely change the business plan, completely change the strategy, went out and got innovative contracts, alternate access, then Space Launch Initiative, had the first commercial contract signed with Marshall for a launch company to buy data, and had a priced option for space station resupply kind of demo. And now we end up today with COTS and commercial resupply service contracts. And you really date that back. People think, oh, it's a great idea. Look, NASA's finally doing commercial. April 1999, very significant time in planting the seeds in that market. So, you know, ultimately the business plan didn't work out for other circumstances, but it's a big shift to take an idea and shift the market, you know, 180 degrees, and still have a legacy today.
Almost an idea before its time. Mm-hmm. Which, in listening to you say that, I was thinking, you know, one of the rules that entrepreneurs are always told in the other panel about how to successfully build a business is focus, 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 right? Is when you're small, pick what you're going to be good at, get really good at it, and then once you're really good at it, then you can kind of branch out and do other things. And the beauty of what that allows you to do is if you're focused on one thing, it allows you to say no to a lot of other things that are outside. Once you know what your focus is, you can say no to a lot of other things. However, that's easier said than done. Right? And in large part because sometimes what you're focusing on is hard and what you're being offered on that's not your focus is easy. In part because something that's coming from the other side may be a better opportunity that you hadn't thought about. And as a founder especially, you've got to keep an eye on where the potential opportunity is, because the other saying is there may be a lot of things to say about your business plan, but the one thing that's for sure is that it's wrong. You know, there's something wrong about it. You may not know what it is, but there's something wrong about it. And so you're always evaluating your other options. So sometimes you've got to make a decision to go away from your focus. Have you guys had to do that? And has it worked? Has it not worked? Have you been tempted to go in the other
yeah.
Tempted? Yeah.
But
I know, especially with you,
successfully.
you say, you know, everything's going according to plan.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, especially in this business, because the government is always there, always there to you know, give in to the dark side. And, you know, they're offering...
Is that how they position it?
Not quite.
Okay.
What they position it as is we're going to teach you how to become a better supplier to the government.
Sounds like Darth Sidious. Yes.
It's much the same thing, but you know, and it's really hard, especially when you're starving to death in the Mojave Desert to turn that stuff down. But you look around, especially in the space business, at the trail of people who've gone down that road, and there are occasional success stories in a profit and loss sense, but it's hard to find a lot of success stories in terms of people achieving the things that they set out to achieve that way. The government's a lousy customer. I know this isn't an ethical thing about whether or not government or the private sector is in some sense right or wrong, but they're a lousy customer. They're witness the wonderful joys in space policy over the last 18 months. To the extent they're going somewhere, it kind of looks like Brownian in motion. And so once you hitch yourself to that, you're in the Brownian in motion pool too. But it is hard. Absolutely. The two hardest things are, turning down things that look promising in the short term, but you just kind of know that's not where you want to go, and getting rid of people who are doing a perfectly okay job. They're filling the niche. The job is getting done. You just know that's not the right person. That's the hardest thing.
There must be something about this end of the couch and this end of the couch from the last presentation as well. I actually agree with everything you said about the government being a challenging customer. But so everyone doesn't know, Debra and I work together at XCOR Aerospace Corporation. And having gone through that, let's go raise $500 million and spend $500 million.
Except we raised 600 and spent 800.
Yeah. But when we set out to start Andrews Space, focus on being a catalyst in the commercialization, exploration, development space, it's also very clear, and I think that's true today, that space is a very infrastructure-intensive, capital-intensive job. And so you go and talk to investors, and you're there in your garage, and you say you want $100 million. It's a very interesting person who can sweet talk that $100 million into the bank account. I think most of the people we talk about here earlier, like Virgin or SpaceX, as people started off with $1 billion and took it to the aerospace industry to create the infrastructure instead of started from scratch. But so anyway, when Andrews started in '99, we did focus on government contracts, SBIRs, BAAs, with the idea that we could build up the infrastructure and pursue the dream in the process, because having gone through Kistler, we knew it needed infrastructure. But you mess with the bull, you get the horns sometimes. And it started off real well, working with NASA. I would say we did very well in the early days, focused almost exclusively on NASA, because I've never done much with the DoD. But then Columbia happened in 2003, and in, January 2004, President Bush got up and says, we're going this way. And within 3 weeks, I think we lost 4 contracts, because it was all canceled, and the customer just went in a different direction. And the problem with the NASA customers, when they go in a different direction, they have to sit and think about it and study it. And it was 9 months before they let any contracts go. But in the process, we went from 30 to 3 people. But we submitted proposals, and we were back up to 30, 40 people the following year. And you learn your lessons from that. And so very quickly, Andrews diversified into services and focused on the DoD, to the point now where we're very much a third from government, DoD, in commercial, just because that's the name of the game. So it is about diversification, and the government customer is a difficult customer, because when they don't want to spend money, they won't spend money, and that's everybody in the aerospace industry right now suffering from that, not just small companies.
Yeah, I want to clarify one thing. I mean, we've done and continue to do work with various government customers. That's not the problem. But don't look to the government to provide progress. In some sense, if you want to make forward progress working with the government, you have to accept that you have the burden of having the plan. From time to time, your plan and a government customer may opportunistically line up. But that's you providing the diffusion to the Brownian in motion, not the other way around.
I think there must be something about that seat in particular, because Esther was just there talking about the government in the same general tone, so that's good. Well, why don't we shift gears a little bit, because it seems like everybody wants to talk about funding and fundraising and investors. And I know Jeff's going to have a problem with this one, because some of his investors are in the audience, so he's got to be careful about.
Well, before we move off of the government, though, one thing when you take on a government customer, and depending on the size of the customer and the influence of that customer, and this happened very much when I was president of Air Launch, and as Gary Hudson over there in the audience will attest to, when when he asked me to come in and run the company, the idea was, this is opposite. 100% government funded. It's, solid. It's secure. You don't have to go out and worry about raising money. But, come in, sell launches. It'll be great. Well, what you end up doing, and this is very much people in this room today are experiencing, you end up spending, and I ended up spending an awful lot of my time keeping the program sold and justifying why our funding should continue, why this was the best thing since sliced bread, even though it really was not new bread. And that time sink is huge with a government customer because you are now getting into their world and it's not the world of the startup. So you're trying to be a startup in this environment that is very taxing in terms of effort to keep something sold in order to get what you need to keep going, and all the uncertainties and the budget changes and personnel changes and administration changes, et cetera, et cetera. So that's another hard thing to deal with as opposed to a commercial customer or investor who, well, they have their own unpredictabilities, but they're not rotating out of their jobs every X years.
Yeah, and actually, before we move on, since Tim, you talked at lunch about your experiences, did everything go according to plan, just like Jeff?
Well, yeah, I guess. Just like Jeff, these guys have an extra zero or two in their revenues than I've ever dealt with. They're talking hundreds of millions and stuff like that. I can't even relate to that. But every now and then, the government, they definitely, as long as the program stays together, they actually can pay the bills and their checks don't bounce. So that's a good thing. So if you can make that a third or 2/3 of your business model, as Andrews is doing, which is what I tried to do, that's good. And if you can make your organization not look purely cumbersome and purely government looking, that's good. If you can keep it looking, keep your R&D intact and be able to do things on the fly, that's good. And within every government agency, there's the fringes, those who like to get stuff done, and they always have pots of money. And for smaller organizations like some of us, you can get a few $1 million here and there, and people want to see stuff get done. So keep that in mind. It's at the larger level, yeah, politics get involved and process and traditional procurement cycles and stuff, but at the BAA level and stuff, and even at the SBR level, you get some latitude to do some stuff. And Jeff talked about syncing up and with the customer, and you'd be surprised what you can do with government money when things line up. And even some folks who work the earmark process, we've seen that happen at every state, that those allow you to go do some things that jumpstart your home state projects, if you will. So that's my 2 cents.
So since we're talking about different forms of funding, I've seen different, so I think someone mentioned earlier about always having revenue from day one. Oh, I think someone over there mentioned it during a question on the last panel. Was that you? Yeah. Having money coming in from day one, which I guess can come in from revenues, can come in from investment capital, can come in from a number of SBIR grants, a number of different sources. How have you guys found in getting that initial funding in place so you can kind of get the business going? I think you started with SBIR, right, primarily?
Yeah, we did. My whole story was when I left Kistler, I was going to leave the aerospace. My wife, Marion, who's our chairman, also worked for Lockheed Martin on the Venture Star. We felt if Kistler tanked and Venture Star tanked, they both tanked at the same time, nothing was going to happen in the aerospace industry for 10 years. So might as well, .coms are taking off, might as well go over there. So I tried to go get an MBA and leave the aerospace industry, and obviously I failed miserably at both because I'm sitting here in this chair. Yeah, so it was, some people called up, asked to start consulting while I was applying to school, and we threw in an SBIR, and I thought it was easy, this entrepreneurship, money came in the door, and we made money from day one, and they made the mistake of hiring an employee. And after that, it got hard, and it's been hard ever since. So yeah, I mean, we got lucky, and I think that's the problem. Kind of like you, when you think it's easy, the first 6 months, 10 million, we'll do 100, I think your ego easily gets in the way, but 10 years on, School of Hard Knocks, I appreciate a lot about being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. One of the members of Space Angels Network is an angel investor in New York who started his company with a great goal in mind. He had his mantra: $5 million in 5 years. He wanted to get $5 million out of his company in 5 years. It ended up taking him 6 years. So he ended up going with $6 million, But for him, it was at least he had that from the beginning. He had that as a goal. So he didn't make my mistake. When he had the opportunity, he took it. But since you brought up something, maybe we can shift gears a little bit. And by the way, if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand as we go jumping from topic to topic. But you mentioned getting your first employee, and I know that's a huge step for any entrepreneurial venture, which comes right after finding your co-founders and finding other people to start this business with. I guess as much as anonymous as you can, I guess, have you had any problems with your co-founders, or not a one, huh? How about
Well, I mean, it's like
senior staff,
it's like
employees?
investors. It's like a marriage. Does that mean that there's never any rocky spots? Of course not. But XCOR was very strange in that we started with the team and the idea and the plan, but no money. Because of the unique way that we got started. So, we already had been through a lot of the shakeout, and we were self-selected as a group of founders that we knew we could actually continue to work together. So yeah, I mean, once every 3 years, there's a little knockdown, drag out, and then it's over with, and we keep on moving.
Yeah, and from that same first startup where we missed out on the 2.5 million each, we had four founding members, and we ended up having to change strategies after that. Well, part of that changing strategies also involved the four of us sitting down and having a heart-to-heart about what we really wanted to do, and from 4 founders we went down to 2 after that. But that was a very intense all-day Saturday barbecue at one of the co-founders' house. Yeah.
And I'd say from the Kistler and Air Launch perspective, it's very different. Companies very different the way they're set up. But what Jeff said in terms of being like a marriage, when you have a small business, it is a marriage. It is a family. So when you're entering into a business partnership with co-founders and you're very small and starting up, you really do have to think about these things, like a prenup agreement. And thinking about what's going to happen at the end. What kind of exit strategy? What if you're all in love now, but what about when you get into a fight later? What are you going to do? How are you going to manage that? And when you're in the, this engagement phase and everything's all really good and everyone's on their best behavior and the world's going to be so rosy, you think, oh, we don't need any of that. And you hire the lawyer, and the lawyer makes it doom and gloom, and you think, oh, why am I even dating you? And of course, that's his job. You're paying him or her to tell you about all the downside. But it really, those kind of whatever, if you set up an LLC, a limited liability company, for example, you're anticipating all those things. What needs to be in the agreement for better or for worse? Because really it is very much, it's the people you are going to be figuratively brushing your teeth next to every day, and there's going to be ups and downs, and sometimes having that unbiased viewpoint, or the thing that you wrote a couple of years ago with the lawyer that seemed like a completely ridiculous thing at the time might come in handy. You hope you never have to use it, but having it can be helpful if you ever do need it.
So I can't resist playing off of your analogy there, because I've seen husband-wife co-founding teams implode repeatedly.
Hey, we're still married.
10 years, right,
11 years on, we're
so
still
now,
married.
So what are your horror stories? Taking that literally. I mean, she was talking
Well, we don't have a
figuratively,
prenup. Didn't plan on that one ahead of time. No, I think, well, we probably have a very unique relationship, my wife and I, because we've been married for 11 years, had the company for 11 years, have 3 kids. So stress is just 24/7 all the time. So maybe to deflect it away from the husband-wife conversation, because I think we are unique, but I think in general, the challenge of any entrepreneur and anyone starting a company is you kind of treat your employees like your kids, because you're part of a family, you're putting food on the table, and I think it's very hard when you go up and down, depending on your business, if you try to grow and then you have dips and how to get through those tough times. I think it's a natural thing to try to hold on, and the problem is you can hold on too late. And I think a lot of companies, the reason only 1% make it 10 years is because they had a bad quarter and they didn't make the hard decisions they needed to make. And I think every company has many near-death experiences, and it's just the ones that got resuscitated on the operating table are the ones that are still around. So that'd be my input.
Yeah. One sec. Can you get a microphone? Yeah. Thanks. It's funny you mentioned treating. It's kind of like a spousal relationship, and you kind of treat your employees like your kids. Right now, over the last year, I moved from Northern Virginia to Seattle to co-found an ocean exploration company. We have a 5-person submarine that we use for marine research. We've got about maybe 18, 19 employees now, but we always laugh because my co-founder and I'm 44, he's 48, we both have kids, but we're the only parents in the entire company, and everyone else is about 22, 23, 24 years old. And so I literally have to treat them like my kids. I took them to lunch the other day, and I started asking them what year they were born. And I was like, okay, that's when I graduated college, that's when I graduated law school, that's what it's like, it's pretty scary. Yes, sir.
I was just wondering if you could share war stories, if you have some, that either couldn't have happened or are unlikely to happen outside of the space business. So war stories are specific to, more or less specific to space, if any.
Hear the wheels turning.
I got nothing.
You got nothing? I mean, okay, so a few stories. So there was a conversation earlier about government-private partnerships, and I think there's a lot of war stories within the COTS program if people want to get into it, from RPK to us to other people. I think we are the only COTS bidder who had the privilege of being a finalist twice, which just means you spent that much more money on your proposal and not get selected. And to make it kind of even worse than that, we also went in and were a partner to RPK and made an investment and lost that too. So from just a pure war story standpoint, I think COTS is a great program for enabling commercialization. Andrews is a company back in, I guess it was 2003, 2004, we were one of 4 alternate access contractors. I remember as that program was winding down, that was right after Columbia. They gave us a little extra money to say, how are you going to solve the International Space Station logistics with the shuttle gone? And that was heresy at the time. And I was the blue sky entrepreneur, and I've said this to other people. At the time, I would have said, no way in hell 5 years from now, NASA would have spent $3.2 billion on commercial cargo logistics at the International Space Station. But yet they have. So, as people talked about how bad it is in Congress right now, and I support that, someone said it was the Empire Strikes Back. I heard that here in the hallway. But, it could be 5 years from now, we are where we are. So I think there's a lot of churn, a lot of war stories going on right now within the commercial cargo, commercial crew, and there's billions of dollars at stake for a lot of people, whether you're Bigelow or Orbital or SpaceX or Boeing or even people here who are trying to piggyback on top of that. So it's an interesting time, but you got to have a strong stomach to be in that game and stay there.
And I would say the biggest, we do rocket science, right? So the old joke, it's not rocket science, and we have to say, sometimes it is. And when you try to raise money in the private sector for space projects, to them, seriously, rocket science is scary. They don't know what it is. They're intimidated about it. I introduce myself. I'm an aerospace engineer. Ooh, what am I going to talk to you about? So it's intimidating. It's hard to get your arms around. It's not tangible. It's not something you can see. We can't really see or touch Mars. We can't put it in our pockets. So when you're talking, in all the days of road shows with Kistler and trying to raise money on the private market, the thing that space is different from all the other markets is that you can't see it, you can't really go to it, you have to envision all this future that for the average regular banker, they don't understand it, and it's so high risk, and there's such a long lead time. Drug companies, pharmaceuticals have a long lead time as well, but you can relate. Oh, I'm going to cure breast cancer. Okay, I understand that. Or I'm going to cure, find a vaccine for AIDS. Okay, again, we can sort of relate to that. But space is hard, and the numbers are really big. There's a lot of zeros. There's a lot of time. So I think that raising money in the private market for space is very different than any other market.
Well, that does remind me of something. I guess that I've gotten so used to it, it's like asking me to comment, the fish comment on water. But space is different in the raising money front especially. And the reason it's different is because it's unique in that, I heard a phrase recently that Apollo was like going forward and stealing a decade of technology out of the 21st century and pulling it back to the 1960s. And then it was gone. And yet people's expectations and beliefs about what you can do in space. I mean, what is it about space that makes it take hundreds of millions of dollars, people think, to do anything? Well, it's because their ideas of what things there are to do in space were formed when the government was spending a few $1 billion. And so if you want to go and do the same things the government was doing, you got to spend at least about a tenth as much as they were going to spend. That's what makes it have this property of people have these conceptions about what it means to do something. And they're all so huge. Is that because those are the only things you can do? Of course not. Or are those because those are even the best opportunities? I don't think so. But there's this preconception set that's because of the unique history of government as a proxy battle in the Cold War that I think the reason why a lot of this stuff is happening now is generational change, and the people who grew up in that environment are moving out of decision-making roles. And that's the reason why maybe we can challenge some of those preconceptions, but it took a long time.
Is that an answer? Yeah. In the back?
Yeah, my business is now over 30 years old, and lately I've been very conscious that decisions that I made particularly in the early 80s in my case, personnel and policy decisions have very much shaped the corporate culture that we've developed in the business. And I was completely unconscious at the time that I was creating a corporate culture. And I'm wondering for you guys, if you really feel, if you're more conscious of it, if you're aware, and maybe it's a function that I was in my 20s and you guys are a little older, but are you aware that you're creating a corporate culture, and how do you try and look forward and anticipate the long-term consequences of these kinds of decisions?
Yeah, actually, we just had a meeting about that a couple days ago at our company. Even though we've only got 18 people, we just hired our VP of marketing. One of the first things that he's going to do is deal with our brand and what does that mean and how does that get implemented, and a big part of it is the corporate culture. But I do have a little bit of a story on that one from a second company that I helped start. We were providing, forget what we were providing, but it was professional services to clients. So we were a very client-facing kind of company, but we also had a team of software developers who are working with us. And that team of software developers generally just sits in front of a computer all day with their headphones on. Don't bother me, I'm coding. But we got to a point where we were starting to bring clients by the office, and we decided that we had to implement a dress code of sorts because one of our senior developers started wearing a t-shirt to work that said, "People suck." And then on the back it said, "Do I look like a people person to you?" So, and he was our 6th employee. So like right from the beginning we realized we had a corporate culture issue. Yeah. You were going to say?
Corporate culture was something, I came out of Intel, and corporate culture was something we used to talk about a lot. So I was cognizant of that as being an issue from the earliest days of the company. And, XCOR was founded by veterans of another startup, and there were a lot of things that were lessons learned out of that experience that we wanted to do differently. And so, in a lot of ways, XCOR is designed from the culture backwards, in that we thought about what kinds of things we were trying to create and what kind of organization it would have to be able to do those things. And an organization that could do those things was going to intrinsically be not good at certain other things. So XCOR is a very engineering, data-driven, just the facts, I don't care who likes it kind of company by design. And as a result, that's why we don't want to be in the retail business. We are absolutely the worst people in the world for dealing with end users, by design. And so I'm not sorry about those decisions we made, but I completely agree with what you said, that those early decisions you make about what kind of company you're going to be and what your style is going to be and what kind of people you're going to have, that's what makes your company what it is. So choose wisely.
Yeah, I agree with you. You don't know what kind of culture you generate till you sell a company, by the way. You don't know. You get to really test what you've created during the sale, and you get to hear the comments. It's we had the T-shirts, "We'll build rockets for food," and you see all the Orion T-shirts and the Orion shirts still walking around Dynetics at corporate meetings and stuff, and they're wearing those badge of honors, and which is good. It's not a problem, but we never had the culture talk, by the way. But it was that we did have we created an environment. I wanted an environment to dream and create and, quote, to sell products. We wanted to reach out and be able to produce products. We wanted to be that reaction motors, if you will, that existed, back in the late 50s and 60s before, they were bought up by Thykol. But we wanted to be that company, and that was my dream. And when we sold, people, I had some people say, I like small companies. And I'm saying, well, we're still going to have this culture because I'm going to stay on top of this, because if we lose this flavor, then this whole thing is for nothing. They've bought a dud. So culture is important, very important, and to be able to have an environment to dream and create is really, really important, in my opinion. But it's not something we preached necessarily, but we were always keep your head down and don't toot your own horn. History will tell the story of whether we were relevant or not. So that was kind of our philosophy.
So I have a question for you, and it relates to both these things, is that we in 2007 we acquired an avionics company, and there are half dozen people, and they are, these guys were just rapid prototyping extreme, but also kind of hobby shop extreme. And for example, they built the Bigelow Genesis 2 reaction wheels in 3 months. From the time the contract award to the time Genesis 2 was launched, it was 3 months. But the problem is now you try to productize that technology and sell it to the likes of a larger aerospace corporation, and you just can't bridge that gap. But there's obviously a clear benefit to having that capability. But so how do you maintain those two cultures? So I'm curious, when Dynetics purchased Orion, how is it now? How do those two integrate?
Well, the innovators and production type people, they're not the same people. And if you try if you put it's a round peg, square hole problem. Even for SpaceX, they've realized this. The people that are good at creating and inventing and doing stuff really quick, they're not the same people that are going to be doing the production. It's just not going to happen, and you realize that. And as they brought in AS9100 quality system in the last year, they've dealt with exactly the same problem I had. as we worked to get Boeing on board with the Aries, but we also put that on Bigelow. And Bigelow didn't ask for AS9100, but I knew, at the end of the day, we better have some quality system that the government is used to seeing, and the insurance providers. We handed them flight hardware like they're used to seeing. And guess what? Today, Bigelow is really glad because that's the standard that they're having to give the providers. So, but the production people, they were people we hired from outside that are wired, that like process. So you got to remember that. I'm not a process guy. I'd go nuts. And if you turn me into that, I'll be job hunting tomorrow. And so they're different people.
Yeah, part of how we organized the company from the beginning was to bring together in the same group a couple of functions that historically had been separate, because I thought it would work better, and I think we were right, to not have some of those divisions. But there's other divisions we're going to go out of our way to create. I mean, we're coming up on the face of the company where we may have to stand up another division, exactly for that reason, because I wanted to have a different culture and I wanted to be full of a different kind of people, and we may very well put it at a different site, because I don't want those two groups of people driving each other nuts when that day comes.
Well, let me finish that by saying that when we were being mentored by them, I said I want R&D to be as a separate entity under the quality system, and I want traceable development, and I want production, and that idea was foreign to them, and we pushed on them, and eventually we won the battle. So we had a pure R&D environment under our quality system where a guy could have a notebook, take notes, go design something and test it without having to call quality out there and deal with all that nonsense in the development phase. And we won that battle, but it was not easy.
I have lots of examples of culture, but maybe one where there was an external influence. And with Air Launch, our original customer was DARPA. It was a joint program with the Air Force, Department of Defense as well. And DARPA's approach is rapid prototyping. Do things really quick and test them, build a little, test a little, learn a lot, and repeat. So then you bring in the Air Force, and their way of testing is very much more like an organized science project. And the two cultures are completely different: technical, contracting, everything about it. And that has an effect on the company as well, because when you start out very much in this rapid prototyping environment, the clever, the entrepreneur, the innovator, the get things done, the try it. If it doesn't work, try something else. Or you don't know if this material will work, you think it's going to melt, test it. Oh yeah, it melted. Okay, let's use something else and move on. Not do 20 sets of analysis to just say, well, how much is it going to melt, or or not. But just, it melted. Don't use it. So now, when you have the external side saying, well, I don't care it melted. I want to know, how much it did. Well, you're changing the internal culture of the company as well, the kind of people that you might hire, the procedures you need to put in, the reporting that you have to do, the reports on the reports. And that has an effect on your culture as well. And it really was something sort of out of your control. And being able to still try to keep your integrity in the process and what you do best, but yet also work toward achieving the milestones and the goals and getting the funding that you have made this deal with the customer, even though the conditions change so much, then it ends up affecting the company. And you end up carrying, at Air Launch, what we experienced, carrying a lot of extra overhead to do things actually that we had already done, but to do them again in a different way to satisfy a different culture of a different customer.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Can we get a microphone up here too? It's interesting your question kind of marrying the two previous questions. That services business that we had once we solved the T-shirt problem with our one developer, we ended up growing that business, and we ended up selling it to another company that we were more of a services company. They were more of a platform company. They hired a new CEO, raised $20 million, and acquired us all in the same month. They figured they'd just rip the Band-Aid off and do it all at once. And once we integrated the teams, what we found is it allowed the integrated company to sell to a completely different customer in a completely different way. And what that required was a culture change. And they couldn't spin up two divisions. They had to keep them all together. But the most painful part was the sales team. The acquiring company had a U.S. Distributed sales team of 16 sales reps around the country, and they had all been trained. They'd all been selected and trained and managed as kind of product sales people. So basically they said they had product sheets and they said, here are our features, here's our pricing, here's how we stack up against the competitors, aren't we great, let me take your order. And as a services firm, we were more used to consultative selling, which is what the integrated company had to do. So I had to work with the new VP of sales to retrain the 16 sales reps. And part of the painful part was only 2 of them made it through that transition. It's like you said, it's completely different people for completely different skill sets for different purposes. And then we ended up having to build the sales team back up from the ground up. Yes.
You know, can I add a fashion statement, though, to that? 'Cause you
A
guys have
fashion
talked
statement?
Yes, you've talked about all the T-shirts and all this.
Yeah.
So an opposite thing, and Jason will remember this. So at Kistler, you know, we had the who's who of Apollo. You know, Dr. George Miller, who was the head of the Apollo program, you know, put men on the moon. He turned 92 last Friday, and he is still very much engaged and a very good mentor to me, in fact. So the who's who of Apollo came from a certain culture, a certain world. So you get on the elevator in our building, and you just walk in, and people know, oh, 7. Well, how do you know that's our floor? Oh, you work on the tie floor. Because here we are with Teledesic, they're on the 5th floor. You have AT&T, or McCaw Cellular became, you know, AT&T, et cetera. It's very entrepreneurial. Seattle's, you know, all about Microsoft. They're wearing their sandals with socks, and we are on the tie floor.
Yes. I noticed you're wearing a tie. That's good.
Yeah, that's right. To kind of dovetail off of Al's earlier question about some of the things that the space community is sensitive to that other industries aren't sensitive to, I would submit a couple of things that very sensitive to catastrophic events that are beyond your control. Jason talked about the Columbia accident and then the follow-on VSE being introduced and going from 30 to 3 people. Jeff mentioned the last 18 months, which has been a bit of a roller coaster.
For us both.
Yes, I think I'm riding shotgun in the back car or something like that. But so a couple of those things were, and going back and looking at the Challenger mishap, where I think we really took a radical redirection in where we were going in space. So my question is, other than the diversification that a lot of you have talked about 1/3 civil, 1/3 DoD, 1/3 commercial, what other hedges have worked and have not worked in your war stories? What hedges would you recommend putting in place for a new small entrepreneurial type of company? Or is it even possible to put hedges in? Is that part of the risk?
Well, in the classical sense of a hedge, you know, something that tends to go up when the other thing goes down, I'm not sure I've got an answer for that. But certainly one of the keys to our success has been you got to watch the burn all the time. You know, you got to watch, you know, what anything that you're committing to as an ongoing expense that you wouldn't then be able to turn off if things go down. You know, absolutely the worst day I have had at XCOR was when we had 2 large contracts, you know, go into hiatus or go away at the same time. You know, and I had to come back from a flight right before Christmas and go up and lay half the company off. You know, and these were not, you know, these were all my friends. You know, but had I not done that, we'd be dead. You know, it was not fun. And, that was the big one, but there have been other times when I've had to turn the burn down. And, and it sucks. But, if you don't roll with the punch, you don't live. And that's certainly had long-lasting effects on the corporate culture because, we're like a child of the Depression, we're really reluctant to do certain things. Like we are violently allergic to debt, or any kind of capital purchase that commits you to an ongoing basis that you can't turn off. And probably to a degree that's maybe a little more than we should be. Rationally, maybe we should lease a few more things and blah, 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 but I hate writing that check every month. So that's the only answer I can give you.
Yeah, actually, we're kind of taking the same approach with our ocean company. A co-founder and I, every time we make a major purchase or a hire or something, we go through the same thought process, especially with an asset. If we're going to buy an asset or we're getting a good enough deal, we start thinking of the resale value. If everything goes south tomorrow, can we at least get some of the money back or all of the investment back? If we're hiring somebody, how comfortable are we going to feel with laying them off, unfortunately? So we kind of go through that whole thought process. Kind of goes back to your prenup discussion earlier, kind of thinking of the worst case scenarios up front. And I think maybe that's part of it. If you've kind of been burned before, you already start thinking of the worst case scenarios and how you're going to deal with them. So when they do happen, you know that you've got a plan in place. Excuse me.
And maybe a different tact is, I'll call it the peer pressure effect, is that getting the first customer or the first investor is always the hardest. And you always have the chicken and the egg because the customer wants to see the money people want to see the customer. But if you can just get one, then you can maybe get another, or say the old, what's another, I'll use another example of say, she likes you, you should ask her to the dance. Well, he likes you, you should go out with him. And then they both have the idea, this is a really good idea, maybe we should do it. Okay, that's a really simplistic example, but it's the, knowing that somebody has something in mind and they have an interest. If they don't feel like they're the only one, sometimes that can work because there's safety in numbers. And you get one, and I'll take the Global Star example when the first contract that Kistler got was, a deal among friends, and with two stellar parts of the community getting together and say, we really need, L'Oreal saying, I'm really willing to push the market, and Kistler saying, well, we could really use help in raising money. So you had the customer and the supplier together making a deal, and then the satellite companies realized, well, we could go stimulate the markets. And you had not only L'Oreal, but Hughes. They went out and signed lots of 10 launch contracts with a lot of different launch companies, including even to launch on Delta III at the time. But they're saying, we'll stimulate the market. So it's an example kind of the group or the peer pressure or the, you're not the only one, that sometimes can be a good way. If you put in half, I'll get somebody to get half, you put in the other half, and I'll put in sweat equity or something, and making a little team so nobody ever feels like they're the only one.
So I think one takeaway from this panel is if you need marriage or relationship advice, go to Debra.
I have a very good marriage.
Hey, I've been bootstrapping company for 11 years and I'm still married, so.
So let me talk, follow up on the risk management thing for a little bit, because it seems like there's a real dichotomy here. On one hand, what they tell you as an entrepreneur is you need to have focus. But the other hand is if you've got too much focus and something happens, so that drives you to diversification. So don't have all your eggs in one basket, and be able to deal with multiple customers, but they're all different and require different cultures and different hand-holding. So which one of those wins out, the focus or the diversification, or is there some magic way to balance those two things?
So I've actually got a marriage story about this. Just real quick.
Diversification of marriage?
Yeah. Is this being being recorded? Anyway.
You did say this
It's being
is the fun
broadcast,
panel.
actually, yeah.
Is it hot up here? Is it just me? No, actually, so in my current company, me and my co-founder go through this every day. Every day we're looking at all different diversification kind of alternatives. We're always looking at all these different things. But what the company is doing as a whole has remained focused. And I think that's reflected, here comes the marriage part. So the first business we had, we ended up having it for about 3 years from start until we ended up selling it. And a few years later, my wife said, see, that's where she comes in. My wife said, man, you and Colin, my co-founder, you and Colin changed strategies at the company every single day. It was like every single day you guys were shooting in a different direction. And I thought back and I realized in the entire 3 years of the company, we only made 2 strategic shifts as far as the company knew. One was right at the beginning when we messed up and we had to restart. And one was at the very end when we decided to sell the company and we had to position it for sale. But other than that, we were constant the entire time. But the founders, we were always looking at different alternatives. So I think that's how we managed to balance it, at least.
Yeah, you want to go? I'll go.
Well, sure. I guess just real quickly, the analogy I use more of a baseball analogy where, I mean, from a risk management standpoint, to win a baseball game, you want to hit singles and doubles. But entrepreneurs love to swing for the fence. So the key is from a risk strategy, is make sure you hit enough singles and doubles. And I think the diversification has a lot to do about how solid your market is, not necessarily are you focused on the right product. So if you see a right market opportunity, then sure, I would diversify.
Yeah, we have a rule that we call within 30 degrees of the base course. You know, we will go after an opportunity that we see as long as it's not more than 30 degrees off the direction that we're sailing. And you know, to geek about it for a second, the interesting thing about 30 degrees is that half of the effort you're putting in is going towards the way that they want to go, but 87.7% of the effort is still going in the direction that you want to go. And those add up to more than one, because that's trig. So you can't control what opportunities appear, you know, and you have to react to them when they come. You know, we've had customers come along years before I thought something would happen in a certain market segment. We've had certain market segments that I really thought would develop that haven't happened yet. But, you know, singles and doubles is a good analogy. And what you do is where you need to make progress, you look for people who need to do things that are sort of kind of like that. And you meet their needs and they're happy, and you get your needs met and you're happy. And then you use investor dollars to fill in with the things that nobody needed that you also need, and with any luck, before you know it, you got stone soup.
Well, yeah, stone soup. I never had any of that, but I have, but I think I think would be good for a good analogy for us was, you know, you hit those singles would be you throw a couple people in over there in the DoD. Maybe you're supporting some engineering services. Maybe that's not really what you want, but you develop enough partners where you're constantly having a place to put people if something doesn't work out. Okay? I think that's real important if you want to keep your team together. You got to have a place to put somebody so you don't ever lay anybody off. And we're fortunate that we never had to do that. I think that's real important because you don't want people getting antsy and freaking out and looking for jobs because, man, a lot of these people you pay, I don't know about y'all, but I've paid, you know, $10,000 bonuses and stuff to get people in, or spot finder's fees and stuff because they're really good people you have to seek out sometimes. So what I develop, a lot of partnerships. You know, in Huntsville, that's easy to do. You got so many contractors out there. We're not in engineering services, but boy, it's good to have a few avenues to throw people at. And through partnerships, you can play small supporting roles and not be chasing big contracts as a prime. You don't want to do that. You just want to, so that's for us, diversifying a portfolio means, hey, we're gonna be content tucking underneath a few big programs, but in a small way. So that's kind of how we did it.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Brian Barnett, founder of the company SatWest, and glad to hear, Jason, what you said. We're 11 years old this month, and so, what did you say, 1% last 10 years?
Yeah, I think it was technically 10% make it the first 5 years, and of that, whoever remains, only 10% of those make it the next 5 years. I think that's something like that.
I'm going to start using that, so I appreciate that. Reflecting on the question we had earlier about our space business is different than others. So I think there's some important lessons here. I think it's great that we have 5 entrepreneurs, space entrepreneurs, on the stage here at once that are telling real life war, stories from the trenches. I remember when I graduated from college in '85, I think there was only 3 space companies then, Space Services Incorporated, all in Houston, by the way. That was Deke Slayton's company, Space Industries, and then Art Dula basically was the third company who's going to be speaking tomorrow night, I think. Anyway, and the answer is no, there's not any differences in space companies versus any other companies. I mean, yes, there are, but in terms of you have to make payroll, you have to make money, and all those things. And I think this is an important lesson because us space advocates, we came up thinking that it's cool technologies, it's cool, it will sell itself, and that's not the way it works in the real world. So I think it's great that we have we have some really good history here now. I think it's something that we should be proud of and take note of. And then I wanted to, I've had a request from another person attending the conference to bring up the subject about space services, that we should actually have a forum discussing the support services for the people, for the launch vehicle developers. That's kind of a missing link that we need to have to start focusing on. That was Richard Main, might want to talk about that more. He's the one that asked me to talk about it. I just wanted to mention that there's one example, and so I'd like other people's input on that really, but there's one example of, a recent example of a space service, a real space service. The state of New Mexico, there's an RFQ on the streets for a company to provide tours of Spaceport America, because it's a secure facility. There's signs on I-25. People get off trying to find this place, and there's such a huge demand for tours. So anyway, it's kind of interesting. That's a real space service. Somebody needs to provide it.
Okay, they actually give me a cool little clock right here. So it shows that there's 2 minutes left. So, yep, 2 minutes left. So I want to shift gears real quick just for the last 2 minutes. And I've already kind of warned you guys a little bit. One of the things that's hit me being involved with startups over the last number of years is the personal toll that a lot of these downturns take on the individual entrepreneurs. The highs make it easy to get through the 100-hour weeks. It's the lows that really get to you. And I know Jeff already mentioned having to lay off people right before Christmas. And there's a business aspect to that, and there's a personal aspect to it. So I guess one of the things I'll ask you to share kind of in closing is not to end on a down note, but since this is the agony of defeat panel, kind of what, do you have one story of the personal toll that your being involved in a startup has taken on yourself? Now, and I'll start with sharing one of mine. So I've got 3 young kids. They're 11, 9, and 5. The sad part is that I can actually measure their births based on my startups. So Rebecca was born as that we were closing our round of funding for the first company. I still remember being at the nurse's station, because they wouldn't let me have my cell phone, at the nurse's station talking to my co-founder right as they were wheeling my wife in to have a C-section, and my father-in-law yelling at me to get off the phone. My son was born the day after we closed the sale of our company. I told my wife to cross her legs. I came home at 11:30 at night. I said, "You can open your legs," and now here comes the baby. And our third child was born the first day that I started as CEO of a new mobile gaming startup. So it was kind of sad, I think, that I kind of view those milestones in my life based on the startups, but that's one of the tolls. I don't know if you guys have any personal stories on that front.
Well,
that you're willing to share.
Are crazy, that's for sure. Well, I remember on our honeymoon. Well, the way I got to Kistler actually, I had what seemed to be an offer to go from Washington, D.C. to Seattle, and I'd never been to Seattle. And I said, well, how can I really accept this job? But I've never been there. Oh, well, come visit. Well, I'm getting married in 3 weeks. I'll just call you when I get back. Well, where's your honeymoon? I said, well, it's in Hawaii. Well, this is George Miller. Why don't you just come on the way? Just stop here. I'm like, George, I'm not doing that. But the short story then, 2 months minus a day to my wedding is when I started at Kistler, and we moved from one Washington to the other Washington. And my husband, who'd never lived outside of Maryland or Virginia, this born and raised Maryland guy, this is a big deal. And I'd been living in Russia, running Answers Moscow office, and I was thinking, it's time to settle down. And the next thing we know, we're moving to another coast. And he said, well, I've always wanted to live on the West Coast. I just thought it would be California. So this is close enough, and if it doesn't work, we'll move back. That's why the moving companies stay in business. And we thought we'd be there 3 to 5 years. And when I became president of Air Launch 5 years ago, so here we are still in Seattle, and Air Launch was in Reno, and I told Gary, well, I'm not moving to Reno. We're going to make this a Washington State company. And I thought, for the gal who was only going to be in Washington State for 3 to 5 years, we had made a commitment to stay. And so on a positive side, there's always the ups and downs, but having a supportive family network and spouse to get you through that, for me, has made a big difference. And having supportive business people that you work with as well. So yeah, that's a positive story on that. I have negative ones too, but we need to end on a good note.
Well, that's a nice story. I don't think my wife would have had the stomach to go borrow the kind of money that it took to get the company rolling. We were lucky through venues like this conference. I met people that had big contracts that got us going. In this case, it was Gary Hudson. We ended up probably with $1 million worth of work to get my business going, and luckily that bootstrapped. That got us going. That allowed me to hire people, and that was real. There's no way she would have supported this. When you don't know how your body's going to respond to stress of a business till you go down this path. It all seems like fun looking at it from the outside, but it is not. For me, I never felt like I had arrived and I was successful, ever. I do get invited to these things because I'm an advocate, and I like to share my perspective because I feel like I don't want you guys to relive pieces of it. So if I can share some stuff with you, just keep you from doing some of the stuff, the stupid stuff, that's good. But it has been a toll on the family, whether it was preparing myself, chasing work down, working for Rutan for a while, and then starting the business. It's been rough. It's really led to my final decision on selling my business because it's physically it's created a lot of back problems, a lot of anxiety type stuff. It's stuff you just don't see. Not everybody behaves the same way. So I definitely tried to quit drinking coffee and stuff and other stuff, but it's just tough. You're never comfortable. These guys that work for you, they are your family. They're your children, and you don't want to lay anybody off. You'll take, the back seat, and you won't get paid, and you'll do whatever you got to do to keep everybody fed and happy.
Everybody except yourself.
Except yourself, and so it is tough. It can be very rewarding, and it has been for me and a few of our owners and things like that, but I did want to share that perspective. It's not always rosy. Okay?
Well, all I will say is, sure I worry about, am I spending enough time with my kids? Somehow I've managed to keep my family together, and that's largely because my wife is a saint. But yeah, but then lots of people work long hours. You know, it's not like only entrepreneurs work long hours. And, you know, yeah, there's the stress of what I refer to as you always have to be the grown-up. You know, you have to be the last one to lose your temper. You have to keep your head around you when all about there are losing theirs and blaming it on you. But, you know, at the end of the day, yeah, I'd like to see my kids more. I'd like to be home more. But on the other hand, I got 2 kids who think what I do is pretty cool. And that's worth a lot.
I guess I'm last. I think Tim did a great job summarizing up the life of the entrepreneur. I think it is a lot of everything you said. I mean, a lot of stress. I think the challenge we have, it goes back to some of the things we talk about, finding the right people. And sometimes you're good at what you do, and I'm kind of the sales guy for the company, and I've turned that over twice, and each time, you know, we had momentum, and then we lost momentum, and it resulted in layoffs. So I went back on the road, and I think this is week, 23 I've been on the road, and we're week 28 of the year. And the reality is there's people that travel twice as much as I do. That's what's scary. I feel like George Clooney and Up in the Air, but it is. I mean, I got 3 little kids too. I mean, they're 5, 6, and 9. So it takes toll, but, you know, it's a job. You know, it's an adventure, but it's not for everyone because it is stressful. I mean, the bank owns you. Whoever you are, if you're going to start a business, make sure you go after an established market that's somewhat low risk with a good idea and sell. Whether it's in 6 months, and 5 months, and 10 months, I will tell you, if you're an entrepreneur, you learn the hard way. You got to sell that first company because you treat it like your kid. You don't want to give up on it. You know, you baby it, and then you got to realize what you're in there for the long. Is it the dream, you know, or is it there to make a few extra bucks? Because it's for the dream, you're in for a long, stressful road. I'm not saying you won't achieve it. You know, we all get satisfaction from what we do. Otherwise, we wouldn't work as hard as we do. But it's hard, and it's hard with the family, and it's life.
I got to say one thing before you close on that one. The number one thing that we as entrepreneurs in and out of this room in the space business can do to make the dream happen is prove that you can get into this business, do something, and make a lot of money. So, you know, one of the things I say about this business, the thing that keeps me in it, is this is a business where we want to do good, wonderful things, and because of the peculiarities of the business and the history of government and the challenges that we face, we can only do good by doing well. So, you know, take the money.
And on that note, by the way, it is a lot nicer once you're working for the other guy after you sell the company and you took the money. And it's a whole lot more fun watching the other guys wrestle with everything and getting to influence them as you want to. And I'm telling you, it's a whole lot better right now than it's ever been. So I agree.
Thank you. It's hard to end a negative defeat panel on a positive note, but that's the best we can do. Thank you.